The radio is among the greatest inventions that has impacted human history. It is a communication device that sends electromagnetic waves through the airway from a radio transmitter in order to convert the waves into auditory signals that can be heard. The radio was a major innovation for the 20th century, especially during times of war. TechWholesale.com states that during both world wars, the radio industry was taken over by the United States government as a wartime propaganda device in order to rally public support for the war effort. In World War I, the radio was used to transmit messages using Morse code. In World War II, it was used by journalists to deliver news stories to public audiences. In the modern day, radio is widely used as a broadcasting medium. People listen to music, talk shows, news stories, podcasts, and more. The radio provides listeners with entertainment and communication. It allows listeners to obtain information at the ready. Though it may seem like a simple everyday gadget, the radio is an invention with a rich history. It is a tool that has produced great social influence, and it is a machine that continues to evolve the methods of communicative broadcasting. The preview of main points for this speech are: first will be the discussion of the history of radio. Second, the social impact of radio will be addressed. And third, the future of radio will be explored.
It took a combination of scientists and their inventions and discoveries to bring about the radio. The radio was an important step in safety for traveling and for the military. Some of these scientists include Henry Hertz, Nikola Tesla, Ernest Alexanderson, Reginald Fessenden, Edwin Armstrong, and Guglielmo Marconi. Henry Hertz was the first to prove that you could wirelessly transmit and receive radio waves. His discovery is believed to be one of the most important steps and building blocks of the radio itself. Nikola Tesla invented the Tesla coil, which is still widely used as the induction coil in the radio. Ernest Alexanderson invented the first alternator. The alternator allowed possible speech transmission, which replaced the dots and dashes of the telegraph. Reginald Fessenden worked to combine sound and radio carrying waves, and he used Ernest Alexanderson's alternator to make the first long-range voice transmission in 1906. Edwin Armstrong was the creator of FM radio. Some of his inventions are also believed to be the basis for the cell phone, so thank goodness for him since everyone has one now. Guglielmo Marconi is often referred to as the father and inventor of the radio. In 1901, he transmitted the first signal across the Atlantic Ocean. Some of the early usage is obviously safety. One of the very first was on ships. Originally, radios were used to contact ships that were out to sea. This began in 1891, and it replaced the system of carrier pigeons and flag signals. This was obviously a great help since carrier pigeons were slower and less reliable, especially if there's an emergency situation, including the use during the sinking of the Titanic. In World War I, radio was used mostly by the military, and it was extremely important in getting messages to those out in the field. Some of the other early usage and safety innovations were radio transmissions from the airplane, which was first done in 1910, and the addition of radio-equipped safety vehicles. This began in Detroit in 1921. The safety and invention of the radio took the help of multiple people over multiple years, but obviously has gone on to be included in cars and is still used for its early purposes of safety.
Now that we've talked about the more technical side of radio, when it was heavily relied upon for safety and security, let's talk about the fun parts of radio, its golden age. So this golden age of American radio, it spanned from about the late 1920s to the 1950s, and it was a time when radio really had a part of every American household. As Cynthia B. Myers points out in her 2014 book, A Word from Our Sponsors, Admin Advertising in the Golden Age of Radio, we differ quite a bit from our British counterparts. British radio, it was government sponsored, government controlled, and so taxes paid for it actually. American radio, not so much. Government didn't really have a hand in it, and it relied heavily on revenue generated from advertising. This is why the Encyclopedia Britannica details in their page on the golden age of radio that advertising agencies had a huge role in the golden age of radio. They basically had hands in everything. They would come up with the programming, they would hire the talents for it, they would lease the airtime from the major radio companies that we now know today from our network TV, the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, the American Broadcasting Company, ABC, and so on. Fun fact, that's actually how soap operas got their name. They were sponsored from major soap brands like Procter & Gamble. So these programs, they would last about 15 to 20 minutes, and there was something for everyone. For the housewives, there was the soap opera Guiding Light and Ma Perkins. For the kiddos, there was Little Orphan Annie. And for those more into crime and drama, there was the crime drama The Shadows. And actually the most popular program in all of radio history was a sitcom called Amos and Andy. Now remember, this is basically a time like this was the Americans' version of TV, what we have today. So these companies would go to great lengths to get listeners. NBC even had their own live symphony orchestra. So this was all great. It was entertainment. It was a great way for American families to come together, and they would all gather around the radio. But during the Great Depression, the role of radio actually changed a little bit. Not only was it for entertainment and a way to escape the plight that they were going through during the Depression, it was also a vital source of news for them. This grew even more during World War II. Local syndicates heavily relied on major networks for their overseas correspondents to know what was going on during the war. This was also a time when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he held his fireside chats, where he would sit down and talk directly to the American people about what was going on in America, what was going on in the war, and really boost their morale. Radio was a form of propaganda. It would boost the morale of the American people, get them to rally around this war that was brutal. So when the war ended, this was actually around the time that the golden age of radio was dying out. When the war ended, American television, it was becoming more popular. It was more economically feasible for American households to have a television. And the radio talent, they were swayed over to TV. The time of live bands and symphony orchestras on the radio, no more. This was actually, we see the golden age of radio ending and phasing into what we now think of as radio. There is a lot of pre-recorded music being played, talk shows, top 40 playlists, what we now think of as radio.
The radio was a defining medium during the 20th century. It ushered in the golden era of broadcasting. According to Lewis, the new medium of radio was to the printing press what the telephone had been to the letter. It allowed immediacy. The radio, which knew no geographical boundaries, drew people together as never before. It provided entertainment to audiences who tuned in. It was the first free form of entertainment that allowed people to listen to live music broadcasts. The radio had a great impact over the jazz age of the Roaring '20s. The radio also broadcasted talking movies, which included lively characters who embarked on great adventures. These talking movies provided a temporary escape from the world and family fun entertainment that could be enjoyed by everyone. Listening to the radio also benefited audiences who immigrated to the United States and who were also illiterate. Immigrants were able to listen and learn the common language of their adopted homeland, while audiences who could not read newspapers could still be informed about the events that occurred during the day. Advertisement companies took note of the impact of this phenomenon. The radio soon became a source of financial gain. Initially, the broadcasting medium began as a public service, yet it soon became a means from making profit for businesses. According to the Smithsonian, after the First World War, advertising became a mature industry and a cultural force that presented social benefits of consumption that included individual liberty, social status, convenience, and improved personal relationships. Through radio advertisement, a more personal and intimate relationship was created between businesses and their customers. The influential power of intimacy that the radio provided allowed presidents to connect with the American citizen. Such an example of this event was displayed in Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats. In his fireside chats, the president was able to promote the New Deal as a solution to the Great Depression, and was able to keep his American public informed about the war effort overseas. According to Rife, Roosevelt employed the grammar of mass culture in his fireside chats to close the gap between him and his mass audience. In doing so, the new form of political representation that Roosevelt innovated changed the relationship between the president and the public. Radio has served as a means for people around the world to connect. As popular culture shifts toward a more digital era, radio is in for a makeover. The future of radio will be the next topic discussed.
Radio has served as a means for people around the world to connect. As popular culture shifts towards a more digital era, radio is in for a makeover. Its future is the topic I'll be discussing next. We are currently living in the information age. It's a time that focuses on technological transformations of our economic, political, social, and cultural identities. This is evident in Manuel Castell's 2003 work titled The Power of Identity. This means that the digitalization of radio is inevitable. There are different means of accessing audio information. The two I will be discussing include broadcasting and podcasting. According to Jamie Ashbrook's 2013 web post discussing the difference between the two, broadcasting is defined as, quote, transmissions via terrestrial radio, AM/FM, and online that output audio. Music, talk shows, and events are usually live, and they're controlled by DJs. Podcasts are, quote, digital audio files that can be downloaded to a computer or a mobile device. This was also described by Ashbrook. Podcasts aren't really radio. They target a specific audience, and they cover topics that are relevant to that audience. Now that we know the difference between broadcasts and podcasts, let's take a look at their popularity in the last 4 years in the US. If we look at this Google trend comparing interest in live radio online and podcasts in the US, a steady trend is observed from 2013 to 2007 in live radio online. But we see that there's a steady increase in interest in podcasts from 2013 to 2017. So this shows that people are starting to adapt and they're interested in on-demand audio information. When it comes to broadcasting radio, the shift from terrestrial or traditional radio to internet or streaming radio is starting to become much more obvious. Streaming radio from different websites, stations, and channels is more common, but this doesn't mean that AM and FM radio is completely lost. Trisha Varner states in her article, titled Streaming versus Terrestrial Radio, Who Will Win?, that according to RAIN News, streaming hours are estimated to grow from 30 billion hours in 2014 to 43 billion hours in 2017. That's about a 40% increase in 3 years. However, also found in Varner's article, the Pew Research Center analyzed Nielsen Media Research data, and it found that more than 90% of Americans aged 12 and up still use AM/FM radio. So this means that the traditional boombox-esque dial is still very much alive. Streaming is more popular among younger listeners between ages of 13 and 35, whereas AM/FM radio is more popular for listeners who are 36 years old or older, and this is according to the NPD Group. It's a market research company. So the future of radio is all about accessibility. We can stream radio from our phones, from our computers, and even our watches. And examples of online radio streaming stations that you might be interested in include Spotify, BBC Radio, Pandora, and iHeartRadio.